Welcome to the Whiskey Congress. Honest, open talk dedicated to speaking the truth to those who are open to hearing it. Black, white, right, left. Most importantly, honest, bold, and fueled by good whiskey. In Whiskey Veritas, we are Whiskey Congress. Join the evolution.
Welcome again to Whiskey Congress. We have a special whiskey to talk about, and we actually have a special guest in house. Our guest is my new friend Ben. Met him the other day at a bourbon tasting at a local establishment in the greater Cleveland area. And we sat down, we talked some whiskey, we talked some politics, and he said he liked the concept of our show, wanted to come on, and here he is. So Ben, welcome to Whiskey Congress.
Yeah, cheers, gentlemen.
Cheers.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's very cool, very cool.
Now, Ben has worked in the alcohol, or in the liquor business for a long time, and brought us something really incredible, and I'll just throw it to you and say, tell us what we're drinking.
Sure. Yeah, no, first of all, Jim, Steve, awesome to be here and talk whiskey and, you know, all things potentially politics as well. But yeah, no, we're going to taste some really special whiskey today. This is Boss Hog V, right? So this is the Spirit of Mauve. Pretty rare whiskey, right? It's actually it's obviously from the Whistlepig franchise. Actually, the last iteration of Whistlepig Boss Hog that Dave Pickerel had his thumbprint on. So
you might want to throw out who Dave Pickerel is, because most people probably won't know.
Yeah, so Dave Pickerel, just icon in the whiskey business. You know, Dave was the master distiller at Maker's Mark for about 14 years before coming to Whistlepig. He actually founded Whistlepig with another gentleman named Raj Bhakta. And this is going back to, 2008, 2009. And Dave had a tremendous influence over the craft whiskey movement in general.
He was, legend.
Right.
I mean, if you spend any time drinking whiskey and you go to, any sort of event where they really start to get into the, the nitty gritty of distilling whiskey, I mean, his name comes up almost every time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, so in fact, he was kind of coined the Johnny Appleseed of craft whiskey, and that, Dave had his fingers in literally hundreds of craft distillery projects. So he wasn't just a whiskey maker, but he was somebody who, like I said, led the charge.
Pioneer,
Yeah, pioneer, and obviously influenced enough people to take the dive and dive into craft whiskey. And again, Dave, having kind of been at the forefront of this trend, he had a lot of foresight, particularly as it really relates to rye whiskey, right? So that was one of the things that's very unique about Whistlepig, is that it's straight rye whiskey. And right now Whistlepig's not doing anything else other than rye. So Dave saw this trend, and it really started in the cocktail community. And what you saw was a lot of beverage programs. It kind of started on the coasts, starts in the major metro markets. And basically, there was a gravity and momentum behind creating great cocktails, and a lot of these mixologists, as they call themselves sometimes, or craft cocktail develop. It came down to using the most authentic methods and obviously ingredients to make the best cocktails. And obviously, when you think about rye whiskey, that's really what was in all of the classic American cocktails, like Manhattans, Old Fashions, etc. It was all rye. So Dave kind of saw this opportunity, because at that time rye was kind of a forgotten, subset of whiskey. Yeah, it was all about bourbon, and bourbon, of course, is still takes tons of share. But he saw that opportunity, decided he and Raj would get Whistlepig off the ground, and as Whistlepig gained traction, one of the things that made Whistlepig unique as well was doing very unique, one-off, very limited release whiskeys. And Boss Hog was which is awesome if you can get your hands on it, but it is incredibly frustrating when you're chasing it. Yeah. And, we talked earlier for a second just about being in Ohio, for example, in a control state where it's, access for consumers it's challenging. And, we're one of essentially 18 states in the U.S. that have this kind of regulatory environment. Each one have their own nuances, of course.
Right.
But in Ohio, it's particularly onerous in terms of being a consumer and trying to get access to, rare stuff.
Yeah,
so,
and what's interesting is, if you want something rare in Ohio, and you're not trying to go through the secondary market, then especially the really rare stuff, we talked about, you're going to have to go through a lottery.
That's right.
And it's a weird process. And a lot of people don't understand kind of what that's all about. Like my friends from other states, like people from Michigan or places like that, they're like, what do you mean a lottery? I'm like, you literally go through the state, you sign up, you get a number, and if they pick your number, then you have the opportunity to buy it. Fortunately, at retail,
Sure.
which for some of the stuff is really amazing. That you look at what a Pappy Van Winkle or something along those lines, what they go for on the secondary market or after they've sat on the store shelf for an hour.
Right.
Because there are bottles that go for $5,000, $10,000, right?
Yeah.
And then, but you look at the retail price and you're like, what, 100? Wait, that how, right? But that's the benefit of the lottery. But the chances of you hitting that are,
right.
and they've only gotten worse because people are now they've digitized that system, right? Like, so you can do it online and all that stuff, and now more people know about it. More people are on the email list, So I reluctantly told a few people about it. Like I was.
You didn't want to lower your odds,
right? I'm just like, I'm just killing my own odds, but maybe they'll share it with me if they win, And so you start forming teams. Like, all right, you got to tell your wife and tell your brother and all that other stuff, so you can kind of increase the chances. But that's just a kind of a weird thing with Ohio. And then the other odd thing is that not all stores or state liquor agencies or whatever you want to call them, they don't all get the same products, and they don't all get the same amount, right? The same allocation, which can be really annoying because, something's been released in Ohio, but I'm going to have to drive to Columbus to get it.
Right.
Yeah,
there's different, we call them plantograms in the business, different shelf sets for every agency store. But you used the right word when you said allocation. And that actually goes back to the entire concept of the lottery here, is because generally they're rare whiskeys that in an open market, like let's take Illinois, for example. And, we talked earlier, we both spent some time as residents of Illinois. You have a store like Binny's, for example, that's a destination store that people know they can find rare whiskey at Binny's. And when there's an allocated whiskey in an open market like Illinois, it's going to go to a place like Binny's or go to a place like Kenwood, etc. And in Ohio, because we don't have that same route to market, because it is controlled by the state, their only answer to that allocation is to do something like a lottery.
Right.
And it's onerous, and the downside, there's two sides to that. The downside, from the consumer perspective, is that you have limited selection. We don't get access to a lot of these super rare whiskeys.
Sure.
And in some cases, not even super rare whiskeys. Sometimes it's stuff that's just, stuff we could find otherwise. But it's challenging. But on the upside of it, from the supplier perspective, is there's a transparency of data that's actually very unique to control states, where you can actually use it to do all kinds of targeting.
Oh, I'm sure. When you put that, it's funny. I was thinking about that. I'm putting my name in this email thing, which is just a giant collection of data telling you, who I am, where I live.
Sure.
Obviously, I have a direct interest in rare, hard to find whiskey, so that you now know that you can market certain things to me, and it'll pique my interest.
Absolutely.
Or there's a good chance that it will.
Or the state can monetize that data as it relates to their supplier partners. And I can tell you, from a supplier standpoint, for us, the data is more that I know on a very granular basis. I can see which account, any bar up the street on the corner, I can look at their liquor license and know exactly what they've purchased, how much they've purchased, and what price they purchased it for. So that's how granular the data gets in a control state like Ohio, whereas in a market like Illinois, you only know so much as to what your distributor shares with you.
Right.
And to the extent that your distributor represents that brand.
Right.
You have fractured houses. So that's the upside. But to your point, control states are a little bit frustrating, just in that you do have such a limited selection, and it can get frustrating.
Understood.
And one thing, the bar up the street, it's going to be a lot of Jameson and a lot of Miller Lite. If you pull it,
I was explaining that you're a legend of that place. I was telling him a little bit about that fine establishment. So, Ben, one thing that we sort of touched on, and so we talked politics a fair bit the other night, and
I really enjoyed it.
I did too. I think it would be fair to say that our voting records would probably be very different.
Sure, sure. That's fair.
Neither of us are particularly fans of the current resident of the White House.
That's a fair statement.
That's a fair statement. I'm trying to keep it low key until the whiskey
Sure.
really kicks in.
Sure.
But
Give it a minute.
yeah, exactly. What's the proof in this again?
115.8.
115.8.
Yeah. So
You know what we call that proof?
What's that?
We call that Jimmy Stroke Face.
That
That
no.
is the proof of Jimmy Stroke Face.
All right. There have been a few incidents where I've over, but truthfully, whenever that has happened, it has not necessarily been due to the proof. It's been to the quantity. And thanks for chucking me under the bus. When a guy gives you good whiskey, suddenly I'm like, get him.
Yes.
Yeah, I know.
Sure.
But anyway, one thing we talked about was the impact of Trump and tariffs on the whiskey industry.
Right.
And I'd love to hear about that because, frankly, I don't know anything about it.
Sure. Well, again, you mentioned like we probably have very different voting records, and I'm generally a lifelong conservative, so
Right.
I've always embraced the concept of free trade,
Sure.
and as have most conservatives or Republicans more traditionally. So it's really an anomaly to see politically an environment where you see quote unquote Republicans embracing this notion of literally Bernie Sanders style protectionist trade policy. So let me start again, as you had mentioned earlier. I've been doing this for about 17 years. I'm on my 17th year now. I'm dating myself, but I guess I need to embrace that at this stage of my life.
I'm 10 years older than you, so you're not going to get a lot
Okay,
of sympathy
well,
this way.
I'm going to drink to that, my man. So, my first taste into international business was about roughly 10 years ago, and I was working for a product that we were importing from Brazil, and it was a Brazilian cachaça called Leblon cachaça. And cachaça is basically sugarcane derived spirit, so very similar to rum. However, it's derived from fresh pressed cane juice as opposed to processed cane juice, which would be molasses, so like white dry rum,
Okay.
Bacardi. So this is, it's got provenance in that's a notion of its origin, right? So Brazilian cachaça, it has to be made in Brazil to be cachaça, right? Similar to tequila to obviously Mexico,
yep.
and Scotch to Scotland, etc. And so we were importing that product from Brazil. We were sourcing our glass from France. We were sourcing our cardboard for our case shippers from China, right?
Okay.
We were sourcing our corks from Mexico. And of course, at that time, there really wasn't any kind of barriers to any of these markets. We generally had free trade agreements across the board. So there wasn't a lot of volatility as it relates to cost of goods. And it wasn't till when I began, after Bacardi, big company, you guys probably heard of Bacardi, they acquired Leblon, this back in 2016. And I got full-time in just strictly in the whiskey side of things. And that's when I first, had to deal with the tariff issue. And this was and we're tasting Whistlepig whiskey right now.
Right.
Well, Whistlepig is a Canadian liquid. It's distilled in Alberta, Canada, at a place called ADL. And generally aged there for a vast majority of its life, but then it's imported to the U.S. and finished off in Vermont. In fact, in Shoreham, Vermont, tiny little town in the middle of nowhere, Vermont. And we, at that time, wanted to penetrate the Canadian market because at that time, Whistlepig had scaled enough to the point that we were looking to, penetrate international markets and kind of grow in terms of scale, not so much breadth. We had already been in all 50 states. So it's like you've got this tremendous opportunity north of the border. For example, there's European opportunities as well, but let's just start with Canada. One of the first tariff that went into place, as you guys know, had nothing to do with whiskey. It was solar panels and washing machines. This is January 2018. Mm-hmm. Subsequent to that was the steel and aluminum tariffs. And then along with that was whiskey. And at that time, in fact, and we talked a little bit about equity markets. I'm a huge stock market fan, and at that time, I actually had a lot of exposure to Brown-Forman, which is the maker of Jack Daniels. Ton of iconic brands. They've got a massive portfolio. They're a multinational conglomerate. It's the top 5 spirits supplier in the world, and the stock was crushed as a result of these tariffs. You're talking about a 10% barrier to entry into markets like Asia, where brown spirits are, incredibly on trend.
Yeah, they're booming right now, right?
Completely booming. And you can imagine you got 3 billion, consumer base in just China alone. And, you can Taiwan, Hong Kong,
India.
Absolutely. India as well, for sure. And so, it was impacting the markets through that. But I started to see it firsthand because, we basically lost access to a market, in this case Canada, because of a 10% duty. And what I've been struck by is the fundamental misunderstanding of tariffs as it has become political fodder, you know?
Sure.
Because, and again, this is, I'm watching in real time people who identify themselves as conservative or as Republicans that are twisting themselves into these, you know, mental and you know, philosophical pretzels in order to find a way to defend tariffs, which run, you know,
Which really means to find a way to defend Trump.
right, because
I mean,
it's a cult of personality. We
Sure,
talked
sure.
about that too, and we could go into that. But so the tariff piece, it's the way that it's ultimately impacted the U.S. market is that it certainly is going to be a barrier in terms of innovation and selection, and that's going to be across, you know, export markets as well. But the other key component of this is the price component, right? Yeah. And when Trump talks about, you know, China paying the tariffs or Mexico paying these tariffs, it's so important that people understand that that's really not the case. Obviously, we pass that increased cost of good onto
Sure.
the consumer. And one of the interesting, you know, kind of counter arguments that I've seen, which is an enormously short-sighted argument, what I've heard from people who want to defend these tariffs is that they say, you know, well, these Mexican producers, you know, they can lower their price to become more competitive because they want to
Sure.
take market share. But what they're failing to understand is that a lot of the finished goods in which the price ultimately is increased it's an amalgam of components. It's not just
It's not just whiskey,
Right.
right?
it's not
Whiskey,
just liquid.
glass,
It's
right.
glass. It's corks. It's labels. It's cardboard shippers. And you know, yes, the Mexican supplier can, you know, even if they lower their price, right? Which why would they do that? Because
Right.
it's, you know, they can't. The assumption from these people is that the Mexican producer can set the suggested retail price. I think an even better example with regard to whiskey, although it's a more simplistic example, is the automotive industry, because we have such deeply integrated supply chains, particularly as it relates to the auto industry.
Sure.
And you have all these components that are being used to manufacture, you know, U.S. automobiles. These are U.S. brands, right?
Right.
But the
And-
components are coming from
That's
All
right.
over the place.
Mexico,
Right.
Japan.
And so the
China.
so the Mexican guy's not changing his price. The importer has to pay the additional cost, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when component XYZ, those costs go up, of course, the end product, the finished good, in this case of an automobile, of
Has
course
to go
that
up.
price goes up. Yeah, I mean it's
And by the whatever the percentage is of that particular component, like it's going to be reflected in the additional price.
Sure.
That's
Of the
right.
end product.
And you know, infamously, it was, you know, it got, gosh, the
We do this all the time, so don't worry about it.
yeah, no, the older gentleman who is one of our commerce secretaries, sleepy looking guy. He was the guy that went on CNBC with a can of Budweiser and a can of
Oh, yeah.
Wilbur
yeah.
Ross.
There we go. Yes. Good job.
You know, he's talking about how, you know, you're talking about a 2-cent variance in price on a can of soup. Well, it's
Right.
like, yeah, Wilbur, that's great. 2 cents on a can of soup. Can of soup used to cost 50 cents. 2
Right.
cents on 50 cents is 10%.
Right.
Right.
So let's
Well, I'm sorry, 4%.
Right.
So when you, and people don't realize this, when you take that wholesale cost of a good, it's got to go through a retail. It's got to first of all go through a distribution channel where they're
Sure.
going to take a 30% cut. Then it's got to go through a retail channel, which is going to get marked up 25 to 30%. So yeah, a 2 or 4 or 5 cent input cost, although it sounds marginal, it actually
It's massive.
By the
Right.
time it gets to the consumer, it's exaggerated 3
Right.
and 4 and 5 times over.
And you're talking about a can of soup.
Right.
And I mean, there's cars. You know, I mean, you know, whiskey is a much bigger can of soup. You
Sure.
know,
Yeah.
just like all those things. I mean, and even you know, in my industry, dealing with the multifamily housing, you know, one thing that we have to look at is we're trying to project construction costs.
Right.
Right, and we're talking about building buildings, and so where is some of this stuff coming from? It's coming from China. It's coming from Mexico, and when they talk tariffs, you know, I'm talking to my contractors, and they're just like, I don't know if I can give you like if those tariffs are in place, I can't tell you right now that there's no way that the price is going to be what I tell you it is right now.
Sure.
Like even if I project out 3 months, like because I can't tell you what the percentage of the tariffs are going to be, or if I can, I don't know how much of a markup we're going to get hit with to be able to give you accurate pricing. And if we have to stay within a certain range of our pricing for various reasons, then, you know, we could be looking at a project that all of a sudden that costs $25 million that balloons all the way up to,
Sure.
35, 40 because of just, because it so many different things are,
Sure.
like you're talking about components. You've got, when you're trying to build a building, you have components coming from everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's just,
And you have to specify a budget, and you're government monitored, which means if you exceed your budget, you can fuck things up that way.
Right.
Oh, by the way, Ben asked if he had to keep the language clean, and I made it clear that you can say whatever the fuck he wants. So
That made me feel good because I instinctively cuss a lot. So
you'll fit right in.
Yes.
Yeah. But you make a great point, though. Not to belittle the point,
go ahead.
but it's there's also the trade down effect as well, where they're going to stay within that budget, but in terms of quality of input materials goes down.
Right.
I think you're talking about $25 million building project that is on a shoestring budget. That's you'll go. I actually I'm on the road quite a bit for work, and I stay in some of these hotels where it's like the walls are so damn thin.
Right.
And it's like it's.
You hear the person breathing in the next room.
I spend plenty of time in hotels in my career, and and so does Steve.
Yeah.
And it's So
there's a number of cascading effects.
Sure.
It's not just that with budget parameters.
And what you just described is kind of like the unexpected or unforeseen consequence of that, because when they put the building together, it looks great. 10 years later, when you're spending money on repairs, because
and that's another thing. I mean, that we, not to dig into too much to what I do, but
Sure.
the one thing that we do have to look at is, what's it going to cost to maintain this building over time?
Right.
And we want, at some point in time, we may want to recapitalize, right? Like, so what's the value of our building going to be after 10 years of, existing with, a sketchy beginning?
Sure.
Right? Like, so
it's
that
going to go through an inspection and
right.
value
So everything looks great initially, but if everything is falling apart over that 10, 15-year period, and you get there and you're like, all right, we have to do a full another gut rehab of this place, and we just built it 10, 15 years ago, then the cost of construction 10, 15 years from now is only going to go up, right? I mean, now all of a sudden that may not be that may not make the most sense. We may need to just start fresh somewhere else because we can get more bang for our buck, and hopefully we don't have to cut as many corners. And those are things that we have to look at because, we go back and look at our portfolio from 10, 15 years ago, and we look at the properties and we're just like, man, a lot of corners are cut.
Sure.
And it's costing us now. And we can't do that right now. We have to think of, we have to think better quality. But when you have a situation like these tariffs, it's just like,
it becomes cost prohibitive.
Right.
And also it raises your cost of capital because now you're talking about a physical asset that's being appraised at a much lower value.
Yep.
So your cost of capital has gone up. In fact, the collateral that you can use to secure the loan is substantially lowered.
Right.
So
and that's a huge thing that we look at, and we don't. You don't get a lot of, like the banks aren't going to give you a break on it and just say, well, I mean, that's just not how it works. So
right.
It's not your fault. We'll do it.
Right. We'll
help
do
you
you
out.
a solid.
It is not a banking term that gets used very often. So there's two more alcohol-related topics I want to touch on. There have been multiple deaths in hotels or amongst tourists in the Dominican Republic.
I'm sorry, I'm deeply breathing in this whiskey.
Enjoy
It's
it.
so amazing.
Yes, it is. And they're blaming these deaths on what I think amounts to what they would call boiler gin back in the day, where it's just
Toilet gin.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know the mechanism of what they're saying. I don't know if it's you would think if they're making gin, it wouldn't be microbial contamination, but somehow or other, I don't know. If it's
so I think it's like a form of bathtub tequila.
Okay.
And there's a specific name for it. And when I was in the Dominican, someone asked if I wanted to go get it. As adventurous as I can be when it comes to stuff like that, I'm really not into it.
Right.
I'm just like, I would prefer if my alcohol came from a bottle sealed. Like I don't really, I'm not, what's that?
Bootleg or
I just
bathtub gin or bootleg gin.
Okay. Moonshine. Like I'm not a big moonshine guy. They're like, oh, my uncle made it. Like, cool, you keep it.
I've met your uncle.
Right. Like he hasn't showered ever. So it's something when I was down there, I had no interest in doing it whatsoever. But it seems like the story is, in order to either have the culture experience or save money on their alcohol tab, people are leaving the resorts and getting this kind of bootleg, I guess, tequila.
Well, that would be rum, I guess, probably.
Yeah, whatever it is down there, and it is. I mean, they said that they're using all these sort of ingredients. I heard things like antifreeze. Someone said like there may have been bleach in it. Like I don't know. I mean,
well, either way,
it's not unlike. Honestly, not unlike a Coke dealer cutting in some baking soda into his,
or I think more accurately, a heroin dealer cutting in fentanyl. And now you're making it more dangerous.
That's exactly right.
So anyway, and that could do so much damage to the economy of the Dominican Republic. And I'm sorry for all these people that died too. I'm not trying to minimize that, but when people go there to have fun and you're rolling the dice with your life, I'm going somewhere else.
Right. Well, clearly, I mean, from a tourism standpoint, people are going to be concerned. But this is actually something. I mean, it's just now in the news with this Dominican piece because we've seen American tourists die.
Right. True.
And this has been going on in Asia for years. It's been going on in Russia for years. Going on. It's these types of deaths are
sounds about right for Russia.
If Steve had his way, we would have a weekly segment called This Week in Russia. He always sends me video clips of Russian face slapping contests where dudes just sit back and wail on each other's face. And
I've seen it. Yeah,
dude. I like one of the best ones I sent him. Not to completely derail us, but there was a guy who couldn't get in a parking space because someone else was parked at an angle.
Right.
So he gets out of the car and he's got a circular saw. And it's like a little Datsun or, some little tin can of a car. Right. And the guy literally cuts off the corner of the car, like the trunk.
Bumper, yeah.
Just cuts off the light, the bumper, all that stuff, just cuts it right off. And then gets in his car, backs his little minivan in, and then just walks away. And there's some guy recording it, because it's in Russian.
Right.
So you're making some assumptions on what he's saying, but I have to believe the guy recording is like, "What are you doing?"
Right.
And the guy's like, and the guy looked at him, and it looked like he basically said, "What does it look like I'm doing? I'm cutting the bumper off. I need to get in. What am I supposed to do? Park somewhere else?"
Right.
And so he does it, and I'm just like, this place. This is a special place.
Right.
We need to highlight it. But anyway, I'm sorry. That's my obsession with Russia.
I understood. I just had to get it out there for Ben's sake. He was scratching where you itch, basically.
But Russians, mixing their own blend of bathtub vodka would not surprise me.
In fact, if they didn't, it would surprise me.
Right, like I would be really shocked if there wasn't someone in the...
Slivovitz and vodka would probably be the two... Yeah. All right, so another thing. Now, I'm really passionate about climate change and environmental issues.
Right.
And I'm not going to directly blame the environment, I can blame the environment, but I won't go nuts on the the specific thing. But the OZ Tyler Distillery in, I think it's Owensburg, Kentucky, had a storm that knocked out a warehouse and took down 4,000 barrels of whiskey.
Right.
4,000 barrels.
4,000 or?
I think it was 4,000.
4,000
barrels. 50 gallons a barrel?
Yeah,
40,000 gallons.
55?
Yeah, depending on yield, but yeah, about 55. It's a tremendous amount, as you can imagine. I mean, in terms of 9-liter cases, that's that's in the tens of thousands of cases of whiskey.
Right. And it's going to age for a long time, and that's whiskey you're just not getting back.
Sure.
And that is devastating to me.
Yeah, it is. It's devastating from from an emotional standpoint. It might not be a bad thing for the whiskey industry, though, right? Supply and demand.
It probably helps you.
Yeah.
And now I got to derail us for one more second because you also brought us a Columbian rum.
Yeah. Oh,
and
gosh.
I'm just taking a hit of this, and it is fantastic.
You guys are going to really like this rum. So this is a beautiful rum. I just, as kind of a gesture of goodwill, I wanted to bring you something outside of whiskey to kind of expand the horizons here. But yeah, this is a blended product. The Demec family, if anybody remembers the old liquor company Allied Demec, the Demec family actually resides in Colombia, and they are just world famous rum blenders, kind of on the level of Dave Pickerel. This is a 12-year-old blended rum, Colombian in provenance. Delicious stuff. This is like just ideal for cigar pairings, as we talked about
That's just
earlier.
the best rum I've ever tasted.
Yeah,
that's the best rum I've ever tasted.
It's exciting, right?
Now, do I drink nearly as much rum as I drink whiskey? Absolutely not. But I've had some really good rums. That is the best fucking rum I've ever tasted.
Well, the interesting thing you mentioned, because rum, whiskey is kind of a newer phenomenon in terms of consumer preference as it relates to the last, let's call it 8 to 10 years maybe, where we've seen this huge uptrend in whiskey. And I was telling you this, Jim, when we were talking the other night, I used to not be able to give away whiskey. When I was working at Campari for those years, we actually, ironically, had acquired Wild Turkey, that Kentucky straight bourbon franchise from Pernod Ricard. And at that time, there was just no consumer momentum behind whiskey. And so over these last 8 to 10 years where you've seen tremendous momentum behind whiskey, and I would argue that that's largely due to brands like, in fact, I would say it kind of starts a little bit with Patron. I know this sounds weird, but that was a bartender favorite, and that was kind of the first iteration of a spirits product. I think that with consumers, they cared about the ingredients. They cared about the fact this was 100% blue agave tequila. At that time, it was all about Jose Cuervo, which is a misto tequila, a lot of neutral grain spirit, etc. And it's a wood aged product. Their silver obviously is just unaged, but the reposados and the añejos were wood aged products, and people were like, wow, wood aging, this is kind of cool, that's interesting. And then it got into Jameson's been a bartender favorite for a long time. I think that's gotten a lot of people kind of an entry point into whiskey.
And I think going back to Patron, I would even argue that Patron did something in marketing that I think was could be theoretically risky. Sure. They said, all right, we're gonna market in GQ and Esquire at the time when GQ and Esquire were the go-to magazines for all fancy gentlemen, right? Sure. And even Playboy, and they said we're gonna market in these like not Maxim. Not the
same magazines that just sell Mountain Dew. Right, we're not going with that.
Right, and I think that there was I think that that strategy had a lot to do with it as well. Yeah, you had your guys on Wall Street and your guys down in the financial district in Chicago, who look at these magazines for fashion and style legitimately, right? Yeah. I mean, and then they see these very classy looking dudes with these very attractive women, and they're just like, oh, next time that they're at a bar, like the whole point of marketing, right? Like, oh, let's do some Patron, right? And then then the younger kids who want to pretend to be the Wall Street guys, and make it seem like they have money, like they're looking at the same thing too. And because I worked in the bar industry in Chicago for a while, so I had kids who I went to law school with who I knew they barely had a pot to piss in, but
they were still drinking Grey Goose on bottles.
Right. What was it? Do you want to say the club again? Because you've said it before. And
Cherry Red.
Cherry Red.
Okay, of course I know Cherry
Chicago
Red.
Guy. That's what
of course I know Cherry Red. Yeah,
that was just putting it on the tee.
Yeah, 10 full years there. But you're absolutely right. And the marketing people have like a lingo for this, right? They call it aspirational brands, right? They call it lifestyle brands.
Yes.
In terms of that positioning.
Right. And, you and I talked about Grey Goose the other night. Like, to me, there's really bad vodka, and then there's vodka. There's no...
that's not true.
Well,
that's how you see it. That's fine. But there are some really... and vodka's, I think, a harder one to really kind of distinguish between... Like
I can tell you what bad. I can tell you what bad is.
Yeah. I mean, Pop Off is
Korsky,
right? anything,
Kamchatka.
Pretty much anything you could buy at CVS or Walgreens,
right?
Not going to be your ideal vodka, and then you have your Grey Goose and your Belvederes they're marketed well, right? But they're really mid-level vodkas, and I think of the vodkas that I've had that people would know the names of. You have, Stoli Elite is probably the best vodka that I've had that is something that, people know the name Stolichnaya. It's I don't know if they market Stoli Elite as much because vodka's kind of fallen off a little bit, but it's, in a taste test, to me, it's one of the cleanest, purest tasting vodkas that I've had, and then my next would be Kettle One. And I think there's a distinct difference between those that you could taste, but that goes to the fact that I probably drink too much. It's a subjective thing.
Yeah, well, it really is. And I'll
tell you what, this is not subjective. This rum is not. This is the best rum I've ever tasted. This is not subjective.
So real quick, what would be the retail price point on this? Any idea?
That's $79.99.
$79.99. Okay, and is it available in the?
Actually, you can't get this in Ohio.
Of course not.
You can only get
Why would we be able to? Because it's good.
Of course not.
It's good.
Based on our earlier conversation about the controlled market. But just to follow up on your point about vodka, because I think it's a fascinating point. I just want, for your listeners who are obviously, spirits consumers to understand, that, the gap between the highest end vodka and the lowest end vodka, this goes to your point, Jim, is much narrower than the gap between a very high-end whiskey and a very low-end whiskey, right?
That's kind of where I was going. Yeah,
because when you have something, a neutral spirit like vodka, this is something that's it's fermented and distilled and bottled and sold.
Right.
There's not a craftsmanship of cooperaging a barrel and then letting it sit for years on end, which gives it so much nuance, right? So when you think about vodka, it kind of goes back to I think the spirit of your point, which is that it's all about the marketing. It's all about the packaging and the positioning and becoming a lifestyle and aspirational brand, because you have to protect price. I mean, hell, when I was selling Grey Goose vodka, I worked for Bacardi. My first job in the business, truth be told, was for Bacardi. And at that time, we had just acquired Grey Goose vodka. So we were selling this shit. And I say shit loosely.
Right.
I like the brand. It's a beautiful brand. And
Sure.
as far as vodkas go, it's a nice product.
Who doesn't like flying geese?
Right. and nice frosty bottles, right?
Right.
And everything else. But the fascinating part was, back then we were selling 750s of Grey Goose for $34.99. That was our price strategy. And generally, you can go to Vinny's in Chicago right now, find a 750 Grey Goose for $16.99. I mean,
Okay.
the downward price pressure on vodka, it's a race to the bottom, as I say. You know, there's downward price pressure. They're all desperate to keep share because, first of all, they're bleeding share. They had lost it to craft beer in that piece. Now they're losing it to whiskey. It's challenging.
All right. Time to move on to politics, fellas.
Oh, gosh. All right. So we're
here we
diving
go.
right in. I like it.
Excuse me. So here we go.
Jim running a tight ship
Well,
tonight.
that was 35 minutes on alcohol. We just did 35 minutes on alcohol, and I know it felt like 5, but anyway. So the biggest story going on right now, and I've got some pretty strong opinions on this, but let's do this roundtable style. We're really fucking around with Iran a lot, and they're fighting back, and it's getting tense. We had a drone shot down the other day. I made one random jab at Trump, but he said, had it been a manned drone, we'd respond to this differently because it was an unmanned drone. Sure. All drones are unmanned. A listener wrote me that, and I was like,
sure.
Yes. And he's like, well, Trump said there are manned drones. I'm like, that's because Trump's an idiot. Okay.
It's called a jet.
It's called a jet. It's got a pilot in it.
We call those planes,
right,
yeah.
Exactly. But anyway, now we're getting disputes about violating borders and international waters versus sovereign space. And I still want to say there's not a high likelihood we would go to war with Iran, but we are squeezing Iran with sanctions that were loosened under the Obama/international agreement with Iran. And I vehemently opposed us pulling out of that when it happened.
Sure.
It seemed to happen almost on the Trump whim of Obama did this, and
So
conservatives say
bad.
it must be bad. Conservatives hate it because Israel doesn't like it, and
because Hillary's emails, right?
Right, exactly. Benghazi.
It's absurd. But
I'm here. You want to go first?
Yeah, well,
give the guest first.
I would just say that obviously I saw the news last night, and they always say there's a Trump tweet for everything, right? And there's back in 2012, the election cycle, he said, hey, Obama's going to try to start a war with Iran to try to get reelected. I think they've seen that retweeted, or people reminding that was Trump's thought process. And one of the things about Trump, I mean, he's a pretty easy guy to figure out. The thought process, I mean, you can see him, the wheels turning, he's, as they say, he's playing checkers, not chess, right? I mean, it's not hard to kind of dictate what his next steps are going to be. But clearly, I think he's looking at this Iran conflict as a potential political football. But I will say this, as it relates to last night, I'm happy with the outcome.
Yes.
I would have preferred to not see this escalate in terms of aggression. But there are question marks. I mean, I don't know how accurate the reporting is as it relates to the deliberative process that was associated with that decision. But it's the fact that he got out on Twitter the next morning and blow by blow I don't know if you guys saw the thread.
Yes, I saw the thread. Yeah.
That I went to sleep okay last night. Like, hey, great, we're not going to war with Iran. But when I woke up this morning and read his thread, I was like, wow, how
close were we, right?
This is inadvisable. And honestly, I think that the intelligence community and the people that put the safeguards in place to make sure that these deliberative processes are honored, you have to be stunned by what you read on Twitter.
I mean, I'm very happy that we did not engage.
Right.
I think that his kind of backdoor reasoning of why it didn't happen, it sounds good on the surface. You mean in terms of he called it proportionality? Yes, the proportionality. I asked with 10 minutes to go, how many people would die, and they said 150, and I said it's not worth it. Okay, good. That sounds great. I buy it. There probably was some of that.
Sure.
I do kind of wonder, like, why that's not one of the first questions you ask.
Right. Like, why did it take till
Right.
10
Why
minutes
is right?
before?
Like it's like it kind of like the light bulb went off. Like, oh yeah, why? How many people are going to die when we do this?
Right.
Now, and I get it. Lots of things are happening. So, I mean, we've all seen enough of these movies with the president under pressure, nuclears, and all that other stuff.
Sure.
You know, like the things that kind of come in at the last minute. But part of me is kind of looking at this, trying to look at it from all angles, and saying, you know, you're saying that, you know, Trump could be using this as a using Iran as a political football, and I truly believe that in his heart of hearts he does not want a war with Iran.
Sure.
But I believe he has people in his camp that do. And so
Bolton, for example.
Yeah.
And Pompeo to some extent, but yeah.
Right. And I think they do. And maybe it's because they do see Iran as a direct threat right now. Right. And I don't have that same opinion, but I don't have the same access to intel and data that they do.
Right.
Right. Like, so maybe, you know, I trust Pompeo a little bit more than I trust Bolton.
Sure.
But Pompeo makes me nervous. Just that CIA background, like, just has to make you nervous, right? I mean, like, it's just...
Right.
So, my concern is how he's trying to use it as a political football. I don't think it's, let's start a war, and then once we start a war, I'll get reelected because, you know, you don't change leadership mid-conflict. But what I do think is what he tried to show last night was, look how close we were, and then I came in and saved the day.
The hero. Yeah.
And I was a hero based off of, you know, me just thinking about human lives, right?
Sure.
And trying to kind of connect with people and using that, and then knowing that he's got these two hawks that just want to go after him, but ultimately they're going to do what he says, which is we're not going to war, but you know, keep putting the pressure on because it's making me look good, right? So how many times is he gonna back us up to the fence? And then kind of push us out of it and say, see, look at me. I was the one who kept us out of this whole thing with Iran. You know, and my fear is that Iran may say at some point, fuck it, like, we're just going in. And how Iran would do that, I mean, because I feel like Iran doesn't care. I know they don't like us, but I feel like ultimately Iran would, like, shoot a missile at us that would, like, go like this right into Israel.
There's no direct.
Well,
You know, I
okay,
mean-
but that would
Yeah.
still be a catastrophe.
You know, I mean, well, yeah. I mean, I think that it would initially look like it's coming at us, and then they would, like, turn the knob, and it would go straight to Israel, and then that would, you know, like, that would be the
Ignite
thing
the
that sets it
conflict.
off.
But that's catastrophic, right? Then
Oh,
the Middle
absolutely.
East just becomes, not that the Middle East isn't on fire right now anyway. I've said for a long time, and most people disagree with me on this, but I believed for a long time that Iran was the key if we're ever going to have peace in the Middle East. Because prior to George W. Bush, Iran was getting more and more progressive. The religious-based leadership was getting more and more pressure to secularize and become more Western. Right. And then the Axis of Evil speech followed by the invasion of Iraq, and that gave the mullahs, or I think that's the right word, the power to say, look, you need us to protect you from America. So if you look at this from the Iranian perspective, they're saying, now you're squeezing the shit out of us economically, even though one administration before, we had an agreement that we wouldn't do this for this period of time, and in return, you would take some pressure off us. You back someone in a corner far enough, even if, you know, in terms of overall military strength, we win. I get it. But you make a country desperate enough, and bad shit starts happening. And there's already bad shit happening. And there's a war in Yemen that's really a war between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but they're letting other people fight it, and we're throwing weapons to them from one side, and I'm sure Russia's doing it from another, and you know,
We
all
saw
our,
that in Syria too.
Yeah,
just a
exactly.
couple years ago.
Our defense contractors are loving it, but it's just plain fucking wrong.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. When it comes to Iran, you bring up an excellent point, and it's, you know, it's easy to lose the historical context, right? I mean, we supported Saddam Hussein in the 7 Years' War against Iran.
Sure.
So that was, you know, the prequel to our invasion after the Kuwaiti invasion.
Sure.
Actually, you and I talked about this.
We did.
Night. So that was, you know, the Ayatollah, you know, kind of, you know, historical reference. And yeah, I mean, I think with regard to Iran, I think you bring up a great point. I mean, what's the you know, kind of immediate physical threat to the United States? It's hard to make the case that there really is one.
Agreed.
Right. Because
But the global threat is very real.
The global threat is real, and it is a proxy. Obviously, they're a proxy of Russia, no question about it, as is Syria. But I think again, it's a wag the dog kind of thing. I mean, we don't have the argument now of like containing, communism and things like what's our global. I mean, it's been terrorism, right?
And it was kind of Russia again,
right?
And then Trump has been Putin's.
I mean, and they're going to go to that Iran, as a state sponsor of terrorism,
right?
And that's just kind of the go-to, and they've been using that for since 9/11. Really.
And now is saying we're using economic terrorism, because that's what's getting said in Tehran right now. Is
absolutely.
We are committing economic terrorism. I'm not agreeing with that statement, but it doesn't matter what I agree with. Right. When you squeeze a country that is powerful enough to do things that could cause global instability, you're running that risk. And I'm not saying you got to kowtow to everyone who waves a saber. If we did that, North Korea would be getting money thrown at them left and right, and they're not, for good reason. But it's a scary situation.
Well, I would say this too, and this is it's associated and related, but it kind of goes down a different vein, and we don't have to get off the rails on it. But it's related to, again, going back to financial markets and just the global economy, which is as a result of a lot of this, geopolitical pressure. You're seeing countries band together and try to find ways to get away from the U.S. petrodollar, which is really what protects our standard of living as a Western power.
If the U.S. dollar was not the stable currency that the whole world relied on,
the reserve currency,
we're fucked.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And so what's happening now, and there was just on Bloomberg, I was watching this late last night. There are countries banding together. Some of which are our allies. Yeah, Germany, for example, that are saying, "Hey, we got to find a way around, the oil trade specifically as it relates to the U.S. dollar." So that is something to me that's a canary in the coal mine, right?
Yeah, right.
And I think that it's related to this this geopolitical threat that Iran poses as it relates to last night. But the way this impacts us from a global economic standpoint, I think, is substantial as well.
I completely agree. And it's kind of scary stuff. And
it is.
So I'm a guy who will blame Trump for pulling out of the Iran deal as a catalyst for this, but there's lots of moving pieces in this. So
you bring up a good. So I just want to, because you guys, your listenership, they know where you stand on some of these issues as it relates to Trump.
Right.
And you and I have had a chance a little bit to talk.
No,
I'm curious, Steve. No. I want to hear where Steve stands on Trump. I'll just give you my 30-second elevator pitch on Trump. I mean, I just find him to be what he is, which is he's a silver spoon trust fund kid. He's the only reason that he's gotten notoriety and enough name recognition to become elected president was because there was a terrible pool of candidates at the time, right, which happened to work out in his favor, but also that he had the name recognition for being a reality television star. So I don't find him to be a particularly cerebral guy, a particularly intelligent guy.
I would agree. He's not.
I think I've made that clear with some of the things I tend to post and things like that on social media.
Oh, but give your Twitter handle.
It's just existential. EXIS10TIAL. Existential.
Sorry.
It's a play.
We'll pitch it again.
I happen to study. In addition to business, I studied philosophy in college at Ohio University, and I was a big Sartre guy. I liked Jean-Paul Sartre. So I became a little bit of an existentialist as it relates to philosophy. So that's where the handle came from. But I'd love to hear how you frame Trump and how you think about Trump, Steve, because Jim's given me his kind of take on it, and I know you've told your listeners, but I think that's a baseline for everything we talk about politically, right?
Right. So what's interesting is, and this doesn't start with my thought on Trump, but what's interesting is, if you look at what Donald Trump was prior to him running for president, right? He had appearances on Lifestyle and the Rich and Famous. He was in Home Alone 2.
He was in.
He was on
Back to the Future 3, where he played the president.
He was on Saturday Night.
Multiple adult films.
Not intentionally. He was. Allegedly, but not intentionally.
I mean, hey, the stints on Saturday Night Live, and you look at that guy, and you look at the people who are just complete MAGA, that's their whole existence now, right? Yeah. And I always ask someone who I come across, and I say, can you honestly tell me? Mm-hmm. Before Trump ran for president, and before he started talking about building a wall and all that other stuff, right? And you just saw him on The Apprentice. Did you watch The Apprentice? No, I thought it was stupid. Weird.
Yeah.
Why didn't you watch it? Well, what they naturally want to say is that, they basically thought that the show was terrible and that he was a buffoon and whatever. But now it's just like, well, I just didn't watch it because I don't like reality TV. And but like Trump, it's not about reality TV. Yeah. It's and to me,
you can see the cognitive dissonance, like
right, like just like you could just see it, like just in their eyes, like just oozing out. And so I guess my thought with Trump is I didn't have a strong opinion of him before, and I'm always going to be a guy that says respect the office. And I get a lot of pushback on that from everybody.
That's fair. No,
right? I mean, but I get people push back and they just say he's not respecting the office, and I say, but remember, the people who hated Obama said the same thing, right? And we all know that
he didn't wear a sport coat.
Right? I mean, the whole disaster with Obama wearing a tan suit, right? Sure. So there's some subjectivity to that, but what I will say is, listen, if he does something right, I'll give him credit. Him pulling the plug on attacking Iran last night, whether it was, for show or whatever, through because when I initially read his tweets, I said, "Oh, thank God."
Sure.
Right? I'm just like, I'm glad we got there.
Sure, it was the right outcome.
Right, it was the right.
Right process?
Now the process and the reasoning on how we got there, I question.
Sure.
Right, but I don't have enough data to really attack it. So all I can do is question it and wonder what some of the other theories could be on it. But I have to take it for face value for now. So I'll give him credit for it. Right, like one, it's kind of a mess you created because you didn't have to pull out of the Iran deal. You don't pull out of the Iran deal, we're probably not here right now. Even though their camp is saying, well, we were getting here anyway. Right, it was just delaying the inevitable. I'm like,
sure.
Okay, sure, but they're saying that, we were going to end up here anyway. And then Trump is saying that by, him realizing the cost of human life, he stops this thing from happening. And then we'll see what happens. You know what I mean? And so, and I look at him and I say, and if he does something of value, I'll give him credit for it. But, otherwise I'm going to criticize him when he does something worthy of criticism. And there's a lot there. Just being dishonest, the way he attacks, the media, the way he attacks specific people, the sort of childishness of it. There's more I expect from my leader just from a sense of style.
Sure.
Right now, we've talked to other people and we're like, well, why does that matter? It's all about getting things done. Well, his style is impacting our relationships with our allies, our relationships with people that we want to work with, our relationship with China. He's like, oh, well, me and Xi talked and everything is good and great, but is it really? We're in the middle of a trade war, right? The relationship, when the relationship with China is good? When we're not in a trade war. Right? We're not in a trade war, we're not in an actual war. And, they have the thing where they steal everybody's technology, but they do that to everybody. So, but I just, my frustrations with him, I guess the only way to describe it is I just continue to let him hang himself.
Sure.
And like I said, if he does something worthy of credit, I will give it to him. But if he does something worthy of criticism, I don't hold back because what's the point, right?
Yeah, you're just trying to be objective.
Sure, right.
Totally get it. I think to your point, that and this is kind of the issue that I really have with Trump, and I think it's kind of metastasized into a much broader, more sociological issue, which is the fact that he is so overtly dishonest. I don't think you can even find a person who, a MAGA guy, right, red hat guy, circle jerk type guy, that can't honestly look you in the eye and say he's totally honest 100%.
Oh, I know people. I've had people do it to me.
But so in that,
but they know they're full of shit. You're probably right.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, in their heart of hearts, they know.
Sure.
In fact, I think they cry themselves to sleep a lot of time. I mean, so the notion that he's so dishonest, and it goes to their point of, hey, he's getting things done, which is, look, I think that's a subjective view of things, and I think you can make a point there. But the fact that the bar is now so low as it relates to integrity and honesty, not just as the commander-in-chief and the leader of our country, but just social discourse in general.
Right.
You can get away now with just saying
whatever
off the cuff, some of his tweets about this is the greatest economy ever. I mean,
are you kidding? He's accomplished more in 2 years than any president ever. Like, what are you basing that off of?
It's head spinning how absurd the stuff is. So it's like that's where I struggle with things. It's like we are living in an alternate reality, and I don't think it's wrong sometimes to push back on that in a way that's very aggressive, and sometimes using aggressive language, and sometimes being overly critical. And I know I'm guilty. Look, I'm very hard on Trump. I was very hard on Obama. I'll be honest with you. I'm a conservative, right?
Sure.
I had a lot of problems with some of the collectivist, kind of political ideology that Obama espoused and how it translated to the policy, particularly the healthcare issue. I was a single issue voter in 2012 because I really had an issue with the ACA.
Okay.
And I mean, me personally, I know that's a debate to be had, right? And we'll probably we'll circle around to it.
We can go hours on that, and I'd love to, but we're getting close to an hour total time, and there's 3 more things I really want to talk about.
Okay, yeah, let's do it.
So real quick, let's just do this almost a lightning round kind of thing.
Sure.
AOC called the detention centers at the border concentration camps. And a lot of folks on the right wing, Ben Shapiro among them, lost their damn mind and said you're disrespecting the history and whatever. And I've got 2 very strong feelings on this.
Let's hear it.
Okay.
No,
First,
you start. Yeah, please.
I think AOC's comment was an irresponsible use of words.
Sure.
I think I'm not in any way diminishing what's happening at the border. I do think anytime you're putting children who are trying to seek asylum and get the fuck out of a war zone that's caused by a drug war that we're kind of the impetus for.
Sure.
I'm very sympathetic to those families. And putting them in any kind of a detention center and not treating them humanely bothers me a lot. I'm a bleeding heart liberal, whatever. But
sure.
to liken it to a concentration camp, I think is an irresponsible use of language. However, my second point is all these right-wingers banging out, this is unfair. These are the same people who are saying, language police are ruining this country. Well, you can't have both of those. If you're going to whine about language police, instead of crying about that, Ben Shapiro, and by the way, I have a personal hatred for Ben Shapiro, and I've expressed it many times on the show.
Sure.
But if you're going to whine about that, Ben Shapiro, then don't go crying at, this college campus said I can't say whatever the fuck. So I guess my point is that it was irresponsible language on her part. She was being grandiose for the sake of making a point, and the right wing complaining about that.
It's everything I hate is Hitler, right? It's the hyperbole thing. But isn't that what we just talked about with Trump? I mean, that's Trump is hyperbole.
Sure. Yeah.
But so you're nailing it, right? Because that's the hypocrisy here.
Yep.
It's like, okay, she's speaking in hyperbole, and we're gonna clutch our pearls. But when Trump does it, we're gonna jerk off to it.
Right. Yeah.
It's fucking completely insane.
He fits in so well.
So,
jerk off to it.
This is where you and Jim are together in the camp of being wrong.
Okay.
So,
I can't wait to hear.
So, first of all, did you hear what she actually said? Did you hear her quote?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
She never mentioned Hitler.
No, but she did say concentration camp.
I think there's an association.
And she never said Nazi, right?
No, she said concentration camp.
She said concentration camp. Okay, what's a concentration camp?
Here we go.
Because have the only concentration camps been? Are we saying concentration camps are only exclusive to Nazi Germany?
No, but I think she was clearly making a reference to it.
She didn't say
the words. She didn't say the words.
That's fine. But when you look at what a concentration camp is, and you just remove, you have to separate what happened in World War II in Germany, and you look at just the idea of these people being detained,
sure.
Right? No trial, no due process, no anything, being deprived of very basic human needs, right? Like no soap, no water. Like listen, our prisoners get treated better, right? And listen, our prisoners aren't in the best of. You go to any county jail in a major city, from Rikers to 26 in California,
sure.
to like we have.
I'm guessing 26 in California is Chicago.
It's a Chicago thing. And we could do a whole episode on that one.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that
was a big Fourth Amendment issue. But
that place is a zoo.
Yeah.
But even right here in Cleveland, we're dealing with it right now with our own county jail. But even the people that they're saying are being treated, like the Department of Justice came out and said that the people in the Cleveland or in the Cuyahoga County Jail are being treated inhumanely. Okay.
Sure. And they are.
But they still get toothbrushes. They still get soap and water. They're not laying on floors. These are all things that have been verified that are happening at the border. So again, I go back. We've got people who have not had any sort of due process, and I get it. They came here illegally. They shouldn't have come. So, but you look at the circumstances that they're being held in, and you look at the places, and you look at what's actually going on there, to the one point where you're right is, who cares what you want to call it, right? But whatever it is, it's not right. And I'm not saying that we should just let him in and let him run free.
I don't think we disagree. Yeah,
right. But I'm saying, like, you're getting caught up on a concentration camp. One, you have to be able to define what a concentration camp is to get your panties in a bunch over it.
Wait a second. You don't think that is hyperbole when she says concentration camp?
I think. What else am I calling it at this point? I mean, you literally, what are we calling it?
It's like a semantical debate, I guess.
Yeah,
it is to a degree. But I mean, like, okay, so you want to call
detention
it
center?
A detention center? Okay, because it sounds better. Because
no, that's not what I want to call it. Because I'm accusing her of using that term as a trigger word. That's what I'm saying, and I'm not.
Okay, I get the intent, but I mean the argument that because the people on the GOP or the Republicans or whatever are getting so up in arms about it being called a concentration camp and going to the Nazi Germany never again.
Which is absurd. I agree with you. I think the pearl clutching is a little ridiculous.
Right, and so if you want to attack her on the way that she used the word, but the word still properly describes what's happening there, I think that, again, we have to go back to that idea of nuance. Right, and like yes, she went over the top, and she is as much Donald Trump as Donald Trump.
That's the point I want to make.
It's
like, guys, that's what's happening.
It's that
she wouldn't be a thing if it weren't for Donald Trump.
Right, exactly, because you needed something to counter him on the other side
of the spectrum.
And it wasn't Bernie because he's just too old and crotchety.
Right, he doesn't have energy.
He doesn't. Yeah. He really doesn't. Yeah. I don't have the energy for this.
Don't tell me Bernie doesn't have energy. That dude's got energy.
I don't know. I feel like he's being kept alive by some secret serum.
Weekend at Bernie's.
I want some of that serum.
I've heard you already got it.
That's what we're drinking, isn't it? I think it's Bernie's secret formula here.
I want to throat punch Steve so bad right now.
But all I'm saying on that is, and I'll end it with this. Mm-hmm. Yes, hyperbolic, but not wrong. Like, what if if she doesn't, if she still uses that term, but just goes at it like, listen, we have people down on the border, they're being detained. They're being,
it's inhumane.
These conditions are inhumane. I mean, that's essentially a concentration camp. Oh. What are we going to do about it, right? And so if she phrases it different, right, which is hard to do because I think that she would still be getting attacked the same way, right? Even if she did it the way that I said it.
The difference is she'd be being attacked for the substance of what she said, not the words she chose. Now it's the right wing.
But her substance hasn't, like, she was on point with the substance, right?
Right.
Like, I mean, that doesn't change.
If you defend AOC, it's kind of funny for me to watch.
I can't stand her. I can't stand her.
I think she's a caricature.
Right.
Of the
left. I think she is really cute.
I think she's good looking as well.
But nonetheless, women aren't objects, and some of the things she says and does, I feel like her mouth is going faster than her brain at times. And I think part of that is due to her age and experience, right? In this sort of thing. Like, I mean, I think in just the idea of being that youthful and then someone sticking a microphone in your face, or even her just taking the onus to do a Facebook Live or Instagram Live, right? And just, kind of saying whatever is on your mind, not thinking about the impact down the line. And listen, there are plenty of young men and people who do that too. So this isn't about gender. This is just about a young person in a very powerful position using her platform, but not having complete control of that skill set yet.
Sure.
Right? And I think she will be a formidable,
political force.
4 years from now, when she's, because she won't be old enough to run for president for 10 years.
Another 10, right.
But I mean, by the time she gets to that point, then I think you're going to have a whole new monster to deal with, depending on how things go over the next couple of years. If she can maintain that seat in New York, I mean, I think then, she will be a force to be reckoned with that'll probably be able to get on board with. But right now, she's just so young and doing just young, dumb people shit. And I'm like, you just want to like shake her, just like stop saying words out of your mouth.
There's a great old saying, and it's you know, if you're not a liberal in your 20s, you don't have a heart, and if you're not a conservative by your 30s, you don't have a brain.
I think there's a Winston Churchill quote.
I think so. I think it is.
But
it could be attributed.
I don't necessarily agree with it because I'm 48. Liberal
well,
as fuck.
it's a vast overgeneralization,
sure,
but I think in her case it's applicable, right? I agree with you. I mean, look, I think it's great that she's energizing people and she's drawing people into the political process as Trump did on the right. My concern is that you have people, and again, this could dovetail into a much deeper conversation as it relates to social media, because one of the key data points here as it relates to the way people source their news is the vast majority are getting it now through social media. There is a component that are getting it from cable news, but of course, cable news is like a choose your own poison.
Cable news is like where there's 10 channels.
Yeah, you've got
and they're all
a buffet of lies. Yeah, which flavor do you want, right? So it's an echo. In each is an echo chamber. Generally, you see very little objectivity. But so that I think that's just a key point in that you've got this influx of people into the political system that are just getting. I mean, they're again. I would go back to some of the things that I read in school from like Walter Lippmann and Edward Bernays and the public relations and crystallizing public opinion and things like that. I think social media is something that these guys, these authors I just mentioned, this is something that they couldn't have even imagined in terms of being able to consolidate power and be able to kind of take mass communication and kind of weaponize it.
And all the data that you can draw from it. I mean, you just never had anything like this before. I mean, the closest thing you had to anything like this before was essentially the Nielsen ratings, right?
Right.
And that was like a small...
And that was a weird thing in and of itself.
Right. And so, but now, I mean, the data is just so much more pointed. I mean, to the point where we know how many listeners we have. We know what countries they're hailing from. Right. There are some metrics that can tell us, male, female, age, everything. Right. So we have an idea of what to talk about, right? Because we know what those demographics want to hear to a certain degree, which is also why I keep Russia in the mix, because
we have Russia. But that makes me nervous, because I think one of these days it's going to be Vlad going, let's kill the white guy first.
I just hope some of those.
And it was just what you're hoping for, I know.
I just hope some of those hot Russian chicks, man.
I love Russian women. All right,
and the good vodka,
and which that's probably why we get whacked. Like he said, vodka's just vodka. Kill him first.
Right. Yeah.
Let the black guy come over and play at our parties, which is what he wants more than anything, is to party with Vladimir Putin. Right. All right, one more topic. We're gonna do one more Cleveland-based thing before we wrap this up, because there is a story coming out that has not been verified. So let's say we're not going on record with this, but there's the Zolak and Bertrand show, a Boston-based sports radio show, had someone call in, claim to be Mikey from Waltham or something like that. Mikey from Waltham. And if I get the town, it was Mikey from one of those Boston suburbs. And he said, basically, read the riot act to Boston fans, saying had they respected the talent and the ability of Kyrie Irving, he wouldn't be leaving. They wouldn't be the situation they're in now.
He called him a rare talent.
A rare talent. Yeah. He spoke very highly of Kyrie Irving. And preliminary data suggests it was Kyrie Irving.
Right.
He called a show and faked a voice, allegedly.
Sure.
And we will play the clip for you. Should we do that right now?
Play it. Yeah.
All right, we'll do that right now.
Let's go to Mikey in Waltham. Mikey.
Hey, so I was just calling in saying that with such a rare talent like Kyrie, it's such a shame that the fans didn't welcome him in more. Talents like those are so rare, they don't come by fast, and I think it serves us right that now he's gone and look at what we're left with.
Oh, my God. Wow. No, that's him. That's him. It's the inflection. That is him. It's not just the voice, it's the inflection in the way he talks. I didn't catch that at all when it happened live. Are you just as blown away as I am, Beetle?
No, I'm not. Beetle is, you are, that's not Kyrie Irving.
Oh, yeah, that is.
What's the matter with you?
So the end sounded like him. You want to hear the beginning again? Is this Kyrie?
Hey, so I was just calling in saying that.
Yeah, it's the cadence.
It sounds like Kyrie trying to disguise his voice a little bit.
It's the delivery. It's absolutely the delivery. You can't hide that.
You guys are...
Tom put us side by side. You want to hear side by side, back and forth, back and forth?
Hold on. Before we do, is it Kyrie on the phone or just Kyrie speaking?
Nope, Kyrie speaking.
All right. So, Steve?
That's Kyrie. Kyrie Irving
called in. Fucking great.
Called into a radio
Mikey
show.
From Waltham, but
as Mikey from Waltham, and defended himself, calling himself a rare talent.
He's not wrong.
Now listen,
he's not wrong.
Listen, I will forever be indebted to Kyrie. He hits the greatest shot in Cleveland sports history.
Absolutely.
And like the kid came to ball, and I will always contend that if Kyrie were healthy in 2015, if
we'd have 2 titles. I agree.
We'd have 2 titles. We definitely Kevin Love would have helped, but I think if with that team without Kevin Durant, I think the Cavs win the title in 2015. That being said, I've listened to Kyrie a lot over his career. A lot of interviews. I've seen him play. I've met Kyrie in person. I've actually had conversations with him once at a urinal at Barley House.
I know, right? Which is hilarious. It is a funny story because it was like his rookie year. Right. He told me the story. I'm like, wasn't he 19 at the time? He was like, yeah, 19.
It didn't matter.
Yeah. It's funny what happens when you're an NBA superstar.
And then nothing bad ever happens at the Barley House.
Right. It is funny what happens.
We could share a lot of stories about it.
We've recorded at the Barley House twice or 3 times?
A couple times, yeah. And,
no, twice. And then I did the fucking chip challenge where I almost died. I ate a Carolina Reaper chip.
Oh God, yeah, it was like
it's on YouTube.
Ghost pepper type of thing, or some next level shit.
That.
Oh God, it's in a. Just so people can understand, it's in a coffin. It's in a plastic.
It is our most.
They just showed me the package, and it's in a fucking cardboard coffin.
It is our most watched YouTube clip. If you go on YouTube and click or type in Whiskey Congress, first thing that pops up is me getting destroyed by this chip. Sitting next to a cute girl. There's a girl sitting next to me eating the same thing who can handle spicy food. She's my friend Beth. And she sits there and goes, yeah, it's kind of hot. And I'm like, I had to go a minute and a half without asking for something to drink. And I'm like, how long? 40 seconds. How long? 43 seconds. We'll watch it later for my embarrassment, your entertainment. But that's Kyrie Irving. And that's a hilarious thing for a bunch of reasons. One, he called the girls and like, they should have given him a max contract, but you didn't, and now look what you get. I would love to negotiate my next job that way. Hey, Jim's a great guy. Jim from Whiskey Congress, if you don't hire him, you're out of your mind. This isn't Jim.
This is the new standard that we're living in a different world.
Right? Absolutely.
I mean, this is the kind of stuff you can do.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
It's insane.
Mikey from Waltham is so fucking funny though, because you made the point.
Yeah, like, dude.
You ever been to Waltham?
If you've ever been to Waltham, they've all, like, everybody's got an accent. And if they don't, then they're not from there. Right? Like, Mikey like, a guy named Mikey from Waltham, like, his Boston accent, right, is going to be so thick. And I don't care if
it's like how you like
white.
them apples type shit,
right?
Right, exactly. That's exactly what it is. So, I mean, the idea that this dude just calls out, like, come the fuck on. Come on,
I'm
Kyrie.
Mikey from Waltham.
Damn it.
That is so fucking great.
And I actually, and Kyrie's a different guy, right? He's a little, you can call him mercurial, I think, is he's a he's
quirky.
A little different. Yeah. And
I personally I like that about him.
I do too. I mean, it was annoying when he left. But I think, again, you had a case of another young guy, kind of acting faster than his brain was.
Yeah, like to your AOC point.
Right, exactly.
AOC.
And
he's like the AOC of the NBA.
Well, he's also the Trump of the NBA because Trump had that
but
history.
We just said AOC and Trump are the same person.
True.
Just on two different ends
Trump,
of the spectrum.
Who did he call? Trump.
John Barron.
Well, who did he call to do that? Or he was multiple things.
Oh, he called all kinds of people.
So Trump used to claim he was John Barron.
Well,
then talk about
the original call was to Forbes magazine because he wanted to reiterate that he should be on their top 100 most richest people. Yeah. I mean, it was a total dick measuring thing.
Sure.
Oh yeah,
sure. And it was obvious as fuck. And again, all right. So to wrap this up, this shows how inept Democrats were. They had all this ammunition going into 2016, and they had grabbed him by the pussy. They had this. They had that. Yeah. And I am no fan of Hillary Clinton being as liberal as I am. Sure. I can't stand Hillary Clinton. But the whole when they go low, we go high. Yeah. No, when they go low,
she got that from Michelle Obama.
You kick them right in the fucking balls.
You kick them in the balls.
Right.
When you have, this is Donald Trump. If you want a guy who called Forbes magazine and said, hey, that Donald Trump guy is super rich, and no, I'm not Donald Trump. And
you're hitting on a key point, though, because, yeah, you're right. When they go low, we don't go high anymore. It used to be that was the practical thought process.
Right.
But now, in an age of social media, in the age of trolls and everything else, you're right. It's a completely different paradigm.
And to wrap this up and throw some love towards Steve, Steve would lose his mind every time a Democrat said, "We had a moral victory here. We only lost by 4 points." And I'm like, "Yeah, but you lost."
But you
and
fucking lost.
and you see the reaction.
Well, it's funny. There was a story out of Oregon where the GOP state legislators, they all left the state because they didn't want to want to vote on something on climate change.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
And one of the I can't remember. I think it was one of their congressmen says, we're not going to be bullied by the majority party anymore, right? Like you can't bully us into doing stuff, right? Like we're
our
not
jobs,
right? Like we're not like you can't just have these votes where you have the majority and you win them. Like actually they can. That's the point of a democratic government. You lost, and that's how this works, right? And
Absolutely.
so you can't hightail it out of town,
Sure,
right? And run and not do your job because you're upset that you essentially
just like Merrick Garland, right?
Well,
Merrick
yes,
Garland was
but
not voted on.
Well, yes, but again, because you lose the midterms,
you lost the elections, yeah,
right? Like you lose the midterm, you don't have the people.
Elections
Elections have consequences, people.
Right.
They do, and that's the part where both Democrats and Republicans are just fighting tooth and nail.
Let me ask you a question though, because you just nailed something. Yes, they certainly have consequences, and so to that extent, I mean, and again, here's where I'm going to voice an unpopular opinion.
Go for it.
Which is that everybody should vote. It's a civic duty. It's an obligation to vote.
Sure.
I fundamentally disagree with that notion because we have.
I like this. Go ahead.
We have
Uneducated populace.
That's right.
Boom.
And we have a substantial amount of people. And again, I referenced it in a subtle way earlier when I talked about AOC and Donald Trump and the people that they've brought into the political discourse. A lot of these people couldn't find their ass with fucking both hands, right?
Sure.
So, functionally illiterate people. I mean, they can't. They're
Politically illiterate. Sure.
No,
Absolutely.
some of these people are literally functionally illiterate.
All right.
Yeah. So yes. Is it? I mean, is it a right, a fundamental right in this country? Of course it is. No question about it. And I don't dissuade people from voting, but I mean, goodness gracious.
When you look at some of the people who have input on our government,
Sure.
right? Local, county, state, federal, you have to kind of shake your head. And on the one hand, you don't want to depress the vote. But at the same time, you're worried about the overall impact of so many people not having the slightest clue as to what's going on.
And that's why I advocate something that's somewhat controversial, which is that we should have a basic, fundamental, just civics test for people to. You've got to demonstrate to me that you basically understand the role of government before you can participate.
We had a whole civil rights movement about that.
It's not about.
I know, but I know, I completely understand.
It's
but
about
you have
literacy.
But you also understand one, the historical implications, and because of where we live, like the time frame that we live now, no one's going to look at the deeper impact of what you're saying.
Yeah,
right?
but
if we do, so if we say, all right, screw that, and let's just say we're living in a better situation, my argument would be is, so you have this basic test, right? But how basic do you make it, right? Because government isn't basic, right? There's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of, complicating factors that all impact each other.
Sure.
Right? Like you have a tariff with China that impacts whiskey made in Kentucky.
Right.
Right? Like where's the cutoff and how complicated do you want to make this? Because you can say. You make it as hard as you want to make it and say, well, we only want the best of the best to make the decisions.
No, I'm saying fundamentally basic. When I say basic, I mean
But
basic,
the thing
basic.
is, but you're that baseline, figuring out where that is.
That's a debatable piece, right?
Right.
But to your point, like your response was, what you said was that people we're dealing with a group of people, a population that your essentially your response was people are too dumb to even understand that. Right? And so if that's where we are, my man, fucking shit. Like, we need to reassess this whole fucking...
Hey,
paradigm.
Ben?
Yeah.
Yeah. No shit.
So
Donald Trump is president. We need to reevaluate a lot of shit, bro.
You and I are on the same fucking page on that.
Come on, man.
So that's my point. I mean, and would you not agree though? If think about it, think about the redneck. And look, we can speak off the cuff here. Think about the redneck. Think about the fucking contingency of voters never before having participated in the political process that came to the 2016 election process.
Just because said,
Donald Trump was
let's
able to
build
stir
a
up
wall
some racial
and Mexicans
and all
blah,
that type
blah,
of shit that never would have voted otherwise,
right?
Which essentially put him over the top electorally. That's something that potentially could have been avoided, but based on that's what I mean by this is not really a racial issue to me. It's a political literacy issue.
No. And what I was saying is just the pushback would be
sure.
As soon as you say we need to have a test, then people are immediately going to go to
this is voter
suppression.
Yes, suppression, right?
And which is a legitimate
issue, yes.
a legitimate enough issue.
Sure.
Which there are some easy solutions for, but people don't fucking listen. I guess my I don't have an issue with it. I would actually love it. I would appreciate it and embrace it, right? But that's coming from a person who...
But see, that's why we do these podcasts, right? So that we can at least try to spread these ideas. They're like, hey, this is not something
but
that should be...
But there's no Steve pointing out the danger in it.
But there's a really dangerous aspect of that, though.
Sure.
Because
you're saying there's an arbitrary standard that's going to be set, and who's going to set that?
Who's going to set the standard? That is the key. Who gets to set the standard as to what? Because the chances are, whoever, it's just the way our country is built at this point.
Sure, they're going to try to skew to one.
Right, they're going to have they're going to have some connection to influence. Right, whoever is making this decision,
and if it's the party in power, like you said,
whether it's part in the idea of objectivity is so hard to obtain, right? It's beyond the idea of just it's not there.
We fucking struggle with subjectivity, let alone objectivity, right? We could talk about subjectivity all day,
right? So you want to put a test out, you want to put this objective baseline test out.
Well, we have a test to become a fucking citizen of the country. I mean, half these fucking people come in as immigrants that are more civically literate than American citizens that grew up here.
Absolutely.
So I don't think it's crazy to say we've got to set a standard to participate. And again, it's not a notion that, I mean, look, actually, let me restate that. It is an effort to suppress voting because I don't want somebody to undermine my vote or cancel out my vote. As somebody who, and again, I'm not saying that I'm fucking Albert Einstein. I mean, look, I just happen to be politically engaged, and I feel like I can make an educated vote. But why should that be undermined by somebody who can come in and undermine that vote times 3 with no political reference or understanding at all?
No, I understand the motive behind your point. I do think it's a dangerous path to go down. Mm-hmm. Guys, we're at hour 20.
Hold on 1 second.
Sure.
I will move further in your direction.
Sure.
If you give me across the board felons the right to vote back.
I think that's totally legit. I agree with you 100%.
Now, and the reason why I say that is because
there's a racial disparity.
There's a huge racial disparity there, right?
Sure.
But on top of it too, just from an American idea of you are punished, you serve your time.
Fuck yeah, dude. We are 100% aligned.
You pay your debt. And Absolutely. So once you pay your debt, right, you can do everything else.
I don't give a fuck what your past is. I just care if you understand what you're doing.
Right. So
if you do,
right,
then we are fucking aces, my man.
Right. And then
punch that fucking ballot. Right. No hanging chads.
So because if we're saying then you have to be able to pass a certain baseline level to vote. Right, and then as a felon, you're just like, well, shit, I ain't got nothing else to do. I'm in jail.
Bring all the felons. I want all the educated. I want educated fucking felons voting. I mean, look, we make kids pass, a driving test to go drive, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
What's the worst that can happen, right? They're gonna run into a fucking wall. They're gonna,
or run over one of us.
Yeah, right.
That'd be bad for me.
But gosh, when it comes to politics, it's so funny because we're just like everybody. It's your civic duty. It's not even that you need to be educated.
Well, but part of your civic duty is to know the issues, right? If you read the you know, anything from the Federalist Papers on, like you have a responsibility as a citizen to understand what's going on at every level of government.
But with duty comes responsibility. There's a responsibility to know what the fuck you're doing.
Yes, well, that's what I'm saying. But the duty, the responsibility to understand it, it's on each and one of us as citizens. Sure. It's on each and one of us. And you have people who are failing their civic duty right now. So your idea is to hold them accountable for their duty. And if they want to participate, then they need to understand the base levels of how our government works. Right? And I don't necessarily disagree with that. But if we're going to do that, right, then I think that we have to balance it by bringing someone else back into the fold who's out of it. And I say we make it felons.
We're 100% agreement. 100% agreement.
Guys, this has been awesome. We're an hour 25 right now. We got to wrap it up. We gotta wrap it up
B.
for now.
Wrap it up, B.
Hit the wrap it up box.
Wrap it up.
Anyway, existential. Spell it again, please.
EXIS10TIAL. Yeah, it's one of those weird like numerical alphanumeric handles.
Very clever. We are at Whiskey Congress. Please reach out to us. Let us know what you think. Ben, thank you so much for coming in. Good talking to you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for the whiskey.
And the whiskey and the rum were fucking awesome.
Yeah, you guys rock.
This is Whiskey Congress, and we went rum, so we're going international. And we are out. Thank you so much.
Hola.